Hey, good morning, everyone. Josh of Severe Weather. Happy Tuesday to you, April the 2nd. Dangerous storms expected again today, and we are likely to see a tornado outbreak for some across parts of the middle eastern United States, parts of the mid-south and the Ohio Valley. We're going to take a look at areas that are most at risk here for stronger tornadoes. You can see I've kind of highlighted them, an area that's under a moderate risk here across parts of the mid-Ohio Valley, central and southern Ohio, southeast Indiana, northern Kentucky, parts of West Virginia, and even the threat for tornadoes extends all the way down into Mississippi, Alabama, northwestern Georgia here as we head later into today, into tonight. We're going to see a couple rounds of severe weather moving through, one this morning with what's called a mesoscale convective system, an MCS, but additional storms expected to fire up as the day wears on, as our storm system tracks through the lower Great Lakes. There will be a wintry side of this as well. I'll talk about some of that later in the video, but I'm going to focus most of this on the severe weather threat that we have. We are interestingly coming up on the 50th anniversary of what is considered the worst tornado outbreak in U.S. history. The 50th anniversary tomorrow. Some of these same areas are under the gun. However, I don't think we're going to see anything quite to this magnitude. There were multiple EF4s and EF5 tornadoes. I don't think this particular storm system's quite that strong, but unfortunately, some of these folks are going to be under the gun once again here as we look at our current storm system. So here's the water vapor image from tropicaltidbits.com, and you can see we do have a pretty intense trough that's digging through the Rockies into the plains. You can see much colder air coming down as well as much warmer air surging ahead of it. So a big clash in these two air masses. Strong upper level feature over Kansas and Nebraska is going to lift north and east. With it, it's going to pull all this instability northward, all this moisture northward into the Ohio River Valley. What's going to happen is as this system moves to the east, it's actually going to strengthen and winds aloft will be increasing, leading to additional ingredients in place for severe weather and stronger wind fields to tap into. And when you have those stronger winds, then obviously the ingredients for stronger storms are increasing. So we can see one such complex racing through southern Indiana this morning. Wind gusts up to 90 miles per hour have been reported. Places like Santa Claus, Indiana, over into northern Kentucky. That is going to weaken some, but may hold together as it hits West Virginia this morning into northern and central Virginia here by this afternoon. But you can see there's kind of a tongue of some drier air aloft. This is going to migrate northeastward, and along this dry slot, we call it kind of fool's clearing, there's going to be enough sunlight to promote higher amounts of instability. And as the air gets more unstable and as winds aloft begin to pick up with our trough, then we actually have the stage set for what can be a regional outbreak of tornadoes and severe weather. So that's what I'll be tracking for you guys. Showing you the current hazards map. This is a rare shot of the western U.S. being absolutely clear of hazards, but you can see things are definitely looking rough here across the Midwest, and I'll zoom in for you all to see here. Give me just a second. And we can see a couple of tornado watches in effect here in yellow over southern Indiana, central and northern parts of Kentucky. Flash flood watches from central Illinois into southwestern PA, West Virginia. Much of Ohio and Indiana gotten a lot of rain here, and we do have tornado warnings and severe thunderstorm warnings as well. This is as of 7:15 a.m. Central Time, so this will change by the time you're watching it. Farther north, you can see there's a cold side of this storm in much of northern and central Wisconsin into the UP of Michigan under a winter storm warning in pink and in winter weather advisories in purple. Several inches of snow will be falling here as this cold air wraps in. We could even see some snow all the way down into Milwaukee and Chicago here as we head into late tonight and tomorrow. And even snow showers tomorrow in the areas that are getting severe weather today. So it's going to very quickly turn colder. Not a big deal for us here. The pavement temperatures coming up. Sunlight a little bit too strong for a whole lot to stick around, but this area will have impactful weather here later today into tonight. And then finally across New England, we have winter storm watches in effect for the southern half of Maine, most of New Hampshire, much of Vermont and upstate New York, especially in the higher elevations. We are likely to see yet another late winter, early spring winter storm here across portions of New England, kind of making up for a lost winter, if you want to call it that. So we definitely have the risk for some pretty crazy weather. Here's a look at the NAM model showing you guys the wind field here. This is up at 700 millibars, so this is well above the ground. And you can see the yellows indicating winds of 70 knots. That's almost 80 miles per hour. And you've got this first piece of energy migrating migrating through the Ohio Valley this morning. This is about 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Central. But as the afternoon wears on, and I'm sorry this is slow to load here, you can see there's a second piece that kind of gets shoved in from the southwest, and this brings increasing wind flow with winds over 70 knots, almost 85 miles per hour in here over parts of Indiana and Ohio. And this is going to promote increasing directional and speed wind shear. Speed wind shear meaning the wind grows quickly aloft, and those kinds of amounts of wind shear can promote tornadoes, even without a lot of directional shear, meaning you have a change in direction and height that kind of causes rotation in the air. You can still have an increase in unidirectional wind shear, which can lead to tornadoes as well. All it takes is just the right amount of storm fuel. And you can see that continues into this evening over Kentucky. This nose of a higher wind flow pushes into the central Appalachians, down into Tennessee and Alabama, and there will be enough wind shear for a few tornadoes, even across this portion of the southern and central Appalachians as we head to tonight. This storm is actually going to continue to spin and actually drop southeastward tomorrow, meaning the cold air wraps in very quickly into the Great Lakes region and eventually the Ohio Valley and the Appalachians. But take a look at what's expected on the warm side of this storm. You can see some very fast wind flow aloft across the southeast tomorrow. So we may have a second, or actually really a third day of severe weather in this portion of the warm sector here across the southeast, even down into Florida. Very fast wind flow aloft. Albeit I don't think tomorrow is going to be nearly as bad as today. It will still be a day we need to watch for severe weather. So very complex setup here. You can see on the NAM model, our low pressure system is going to move into Illinois here this morning, and it's actually going to deepen as that pressure drops down to about 989 millibars, a pretty intense Great Lakes storm system around 4 o'clock Central Time here near Chicago and near northwestern Indiana. With the cold side of this, you see these dashed blue lines. That is cold air getting funneled in from Canada. We are going to see intense amounts of snow falling over Wisconsin and over parts of UP of Michigan. We see a front that's going to be stretched across northern Ohio, southwestern PA, right through the Delmarva. On the cool side of it, just a soaking rain expected. On the warm side, and right where that front lines up, that directional wind shear, because the warm front's going to change the wind flow from southwesterly aloft down to more easterly at the surface, southeasterly and then southerly. And where you've got that change in direction, you've got the potential for rotating thunderstorms. A lot of fast wind flow, so even without tornadoes, we could be dealing with damaging wind gusts in excess of 80 miles per hour as this storm races east-northeast. This is a classic setup for an early spring severe weather outbreak here across this area. And the threat for severe weather extends all the way down into Alabama, Georgia, and the Western Carolinas and East Tennessee as we get later into the night tonight. Tomorrow, this low pressure system kind of occludes. It stops deepening. It kind of stalls. But with that second piece rounding the base of the trough, you've got another low pressure system set to form in the afternoon over eastern parts of Virginia. And additional showers and storms will fire up, especially here in the warm sector. And at the same time, the cold air gets dammed here into southeastern Canada, into New England, and we see some ice across portions of Massachusetts, switching over to snow over New Hampshire, and eventually tomorrow night we'll see that snow piling up across Maine, northern New Hampshire, and the North Country here, continuing into Thursday morning, and then spreading into Atlantic Canada throughout the day on Thursday. We'll see a switch over to lighter rain and maybe some mixed precipitation over Nova Scotia by the afternoon on Thursday. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. It is important to you locally, but I just don't have the time today. Strong winds expected here. Regardless of whether or not you get thunderstorms, winds can gust over 60 miles per hour over the northern Great Lakes, over 50 miles per hour here over the Ohio Valley, some gusts over 40 miles per hour across the twin tiers of PA and New Jersey and New York State here, and some stronger wind gusts as well over parts of the Mid-South. Tomorrow we're going to see these winds ramping up on the southeastern coast, 40 to 50 miles per hour from the panhandle of Florida up through the tidewater of Virginia, including the Outer Banks. We could see damaging winds there and some coastal flooding. And then we're going to see strong winds spreading up the east coast here into Long Island and southeast New England, which has had just such a rough winter with wind. But we are going to see these wind gusts tomorrow afternoon into tomorrow evening, gusting over 60 miles per hour. Let's look at the severe weather. I'm going to focus most of the video on this. We did have a moderate risk in Oklahoma last night. There was severe weather and some giant hail. This risk is going to be more for tornadoes, some of which could be long-tracked on the ground for a couple of hours, and this would be the second outbreak in Ohio so far this spring. We had one a few weeks back. If you don't, that one was kind of not very well forecast. It just kind of sprung up on it. This one, not an easy forecast. There are ingredients that favor very strong tornadoes. There's also some potential detractors to this happening, some potential what we call fail modes, where we may have a large ceiling, but we may not see everybody getting the tornadoes. There's just some different competing factors here in play. But in my opinion, I don't think we should take anything lightly when we're dealing with a storm of this magnitude. So we have this moderate risk over central and southern Ohio, extending towards Parkersburg, West Virginia, back into northern Kentucky, all the way back to Louisville and even towards Owensboro. And we have an enhanced risk all the way into northern Alabama, northeast Mississippi, most of Tennessee in an enhanced risk, and all the way up into southwest PA and into West Virginia, the Kanawha Valley, and even western parts or southwestern portions of Virginia, over in places like Wise County here in Virginia. We have this risk for enhanced severe weather, and that includes tornadoes. I do think there's a potential. Now, we're going to have to wait and see how things play out this morning, but potential to see a second area that could have a moderate risk, including Nashville, maybe all the way down to Huntsville. But again, really a difficult forecast to try to figure that part out. We do have this 15% risk for tornadoes, which will likely be strong in some of these areas in this hash line area. And you can see that includes most of Ohio, southeastern Indiana, most of Kentucky, a lot of Tennessee, northern Alabama, all the way down to Birmingham, the risk for a stronger tornado. And I know the NOAA area here is blocking it, but all the way down to places like Oxford, Mississippi as well. The area that has the greatest chance of these strong tornadoes is in the red, and it does get into West Virginia. And I know there's mountains, there's hills and hollers here in West Virginia, but I don't think those are going to break up every single storm here. In fact, we could see some tornadoes surviving all the way into the higher Appalachians here, maybe even sneaking over towards Roanoke, towards places like Stokes County, North Carolina, upstate South Carolina, all the way down into the middle of Georgia here during the overnight hours tonight. Damaging winds here. We could see gusts of 90 miles per hour or even higher. And whether or not we get a tornado, we're going to see damage because of that. And the area that's highlighted for the greatest risk, you can see here, is from near Nashville up to north of Columbus, all the way up close to Youngstown, maybe even over to Pittsburgh here later in the afternoon and evening. A large hail threat as well. We saw massive hail in Oklahoma and Texas last night, parts of Missouri as well, and Illinois. Today, that threat shifts here eastward, right along the Ohio River, southeast Indiana, into central Ohio. We do have a threat for massive hail, which will be potentially deadly if you're out caught in that. I'll show you guys where the storm fuel is, and these photographs indicate wind fields aloft, and the longer they get, the more pink you see, the greater the amount of wind shear in place. As we get through, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, so if you want to go back and study it later, you can. I just don't have time today, unfortunately. You can see, though, as we get to the early afternoon hours, our CAPE does increase over much of Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. We do have amounts that are over 2,000 joules per kilogram. And we see very long photographs here as well. If I'm going to pull up a sounding here over southeast Indiana, I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. You can see very unstable here, a big drop in temperature aloft, very buoyant air, and we do see winds picking up very quickly with height from about 15 knots all the way up to almost 50 knots as we get up into the atmosphere. So there's definitely wind shear in place with the potential for strong tornadoes due to that increase in wind shear. If we look down into parts of Kentucky, we will see the same thing, just very unstable here. Not a lot of directional wind shear. It's all out of the southwest, but certainly the amount of wind shear is pretty high, and that favors what could be EF1, EF2, or even EF3 tornadoes. As we get closer to the warm front here, you can see there's actually some more wind shear over parts of Ohio. And with this in place, we've got those backing winds here all the way out of the south-southeast and quickly going to southwest. So there's not as much storm fuel. The temperatures are a little bit lower near the warm front, but there's also more direction to that wind shear as we see that switching around from southeast to southwest. Very much something we need to be watching here this afternoon. Here's a look at the tornado ingredients in place. This calculates a fixed layer where wind shear is going to increase. This is around 11 a.m. this morning, Central, noon Eastern time. You can see these numbers do climb pretty substantially early this afternoon over southern Indiana, but even over parts of western Tennessee, we do have parameters in place for tornadoes. The area I think really needs to be watched is going to be southeast Indiana and southwest Ohio around mid-afternoon, and then as we get later into the afternoon, central Ohio, northern Kentucky, Another round potentially over eastern Indiana, and then we start seeing things moving into West Virginia this evening. And we have to watch the southern part of this as well. The HER model says the window is kind of short for strong tornadoes. However, I have seen many times this be wrong, and there may be enough instability where we've got to keep an eye on the southern mode here for this evening. So again, don't get too fixated on one model. I do have to show you something, but again, I don't want you to get too fixated with each run. That is something I've learned over time here. But as you guys take a look at where there are updrafts that can rotate, you can see Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio are certainly at risk here. Let me take this back a little bit to the 6Z run, and you can see quite a bit of updraft helicity in place to support damaging thunderstorms from Mississippi up into West Virginia around 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon. Even into parts of Virginia, we got to keep an eye on things here, and even in Western PA as we get into early tonight. And then overnight, we see things kind of fade, and then maybe a second area to watch tomorrow. And I'll break that down for you in just a second here. Here's a look at the forecast radar, and you can see our first area of severe weather moving through Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio this morning. That's going to fade, but additional storms fire up here in the warm sector, and a very busy radar expected here as we get to about 2 to 3 o'clock this afternoon from central Mississippi right up to the western part of Middle Tennessee, central Kentucky, northeastern Kentucky, right along the Ohio River into Indiana and Illinois. And this, by the way, is going to be a switch over to snow in northern Illinois. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but multiple waves to watch here, at least two that move through here. One mid to late afternoon, the other early this evening in Ohio and Kentucky. We definitely have to keep an eye on a lot of this. Nocturnal storms still going to be around, especially down across parts of Alabama, northwestern Georgia, and East Tennessee around 10 or 11 o'clock tonight. But the northern portion of this system is likely to lose a lot of the steam that it needs here to produce severe weather, a lot of that fuel. We're still going to have heavy rain to deal with into tomorrow morning, a lot of lightning possible, and then we see the colder air wrap in here, rain showers, maybe some small hail, some graupel, and then a switch over to snow showers in the higher elevations with accumulation and light accumulation even around the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley later tomorrow into tomorrow night. Here's Illinois and Indiana real quick. You guys can see multiple waves expected. I really don't have a lot of time to give you hour by hour here. This is just one model run. It will probably change, but you can see we definitely have to watch things across Indiana and western Ohio here starting around midday and continuing into the mid to late afternoon. And then things are going to clear that area as we get into the evening. And we will see snow falling by morning in Chicago. Snow, heavy snow, potentially west of Chicago all the way over to Rockford and DeKalb parts of Illinois, and that will eventually make its way into northwest Indiana here by tomorrow evening. Here's a look at Ohio. I know a lot of you guys are watching from there. We've got one destructive area of storms to move through this morning. Then we're going to get a break for a few hours, then more storms coming in from the southwest around early to mid-afternoon. These certainly could have stronger tornadoes with them, especially closer to the Ohio River, places like Peebles and Portsmouth, over to Parkersburg, Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon, maybe even near Pittsburgh, and Morgantown and Bridgeport, West Virginia, around 5, 6 o'clock. More storms to keep an eye on here. I don't think the second wave is going to have as great a tornado threat, but I could be wrong too. So definitely watch this next wave moving through here. There's still a lot of wind shear in place, and this will fade after 10 o'clock, and we should have quieter weather overnight and early tomorrow. But going to be a rough afternoon and evening across this area for sure. Farther south, Kentucky, I'm very much concerned about with one wave moving through this morning, and then additional storms that are going to fire up around lunchtime. Louisville, Elizabethtown, all the way down to Bowling Green and westward. We do have the threat for storms which will rotate, could bring massive hail, powerful winds, and certainly some tornadoes. And I think it's going to be a very nasty afternoon across Kentucky before things clear out of here this evening. There may even be a second line of severe weather moving through early tonight, right after sunset, before things settle down here. Tennessee as well. Don't want to ignore you guys in Tennessee. I do think you do have the risk for some intense tornadoes here. Even northeastern Mississippi around 2, 3 o'clock this afternoon. Nashville around mid-afternoon. Cookeville early this evening. But I think our best chance is going to be north of I-40 during the afternoon hours. We are going to have to keep an eye on things, though, around the lower Tennessee Valley towards early this evening. Speaking of the lower Tennessee Valley, we are going to see some severe weather potential here this afternoon. There's more storm fuel, albeit less wind flow aloft for that to happen. But here we go, northeastern and central Mississippi, showers and storms. Better chance for severe weather, I think, is going to be across northern and eastern Alabama here around 8 to 10 o'clock tonight, Central Time. 9 to 11 eastern across western Georgia here. Overnight, I think these storms do fade by the time they hit the I-85 corridor, but again, that's not a guarantee either. There's still strong wind flow aloft. We could certainly still have a threat for some severe weather overnight by the time this moves into central Georgia and southeastern Alabama. Here's a look at the East Coast tomorrow real quick. We do have a slight risk now east of Raleigh, but basically along and east of I-95 all the way up to D.C., southern Maryland, southern Delaware, eastern North Carolina, the Tidewater area, the eastern peninsula here. Slight risk at this point. There is a chance for tornadoes even back to Raleigh and Durham, back to Charlottesville, back to Montgomery County in Baltimore in central Maryland. And there's a threat for severe wind across this entire area and a threat for some hail as well. Why not, right? Here's a quick look at what's going to happen tomorrow. We've got a warm sector in place here where storms move through overnight. They are going to weaken for the most part, but then we'll see additional storms in the warm sector like we're seeing today in Ohio and Kentucky. And the time frame on these is going to be late morning across central Virginia, North Carolina, eastern South Carolina, continuing into the early to mid-afternoon near the coast. And by evening, I think things are going to quiet down very quickly. We may still have a few heavier cells, but I don't think we're talking severe weather at that point. Here's a close look at North Carolina and Virginia. Most of the weather stays north and west of this area for tonight, but we do have to keep an eye on things overnight just to be safe over the western parts of the Carolinas, along and west of I-81 as well. As you can see here, though, there will be additional storms in the warm sector tomorrow that we have to keep an eye on. If you're traveling I-95 for spring break, be alert for those. They could be very quick and they could be producing an isolated tornado, but I don't think strong tornadoes by the time we get to tomorrow here. And oh, by the way, by the time we get later into tomorrow night, we'll see this switching over to snow across the higher elevations as well, except in Asheville. We don't get snow there. Here's a look at where our risk for potential tornadoes and severe weather is. You can see it's all over West Virginia, Buckhannon, Charleston, Huntington, all the way up to near Bridgeport, Clarksburg, even over to Elkins and into the Winchester and Stanton areas here in Virginia. We have to watch out for some rotating thunderstorms. You can see we do have a pretty good shot tomorrow at some severe weather, but it's kind of disjointed by the time we get here. We get the stronger winds aloft, but we lose some of the wind shear that comes with it. There's still some longer photographs we have to keep an eye on here. I'm just going to pull up a sounding from New Kent County, Virginia, just to show you guys. Very strong wind flow as we get aloft here. Not quite moist enough at the surface for tornadoes, but certainly there will be instability. So there could be some severe weather across this area that we need to watch. And finally, let's keep an eye on the Gulf Coast as well. I don't think you're seeing much severe weather. You have to get north of I-10 for that. But tomorrow, we could have severe weather over southeastern Georgia in the morning and across northern Florida late morning into central Florida in the afternoon. There is a slight risk for severe weather here. It will fade when it gets into South Florida. We're mainly looking at I-4 during the early to mid-afternoon hours, but perhaps even Jacksonville and Gainesville. There's a 2% chance for tornadoes across this area, a little bit better chance for severe wind, and a chance for some hail as well. And here's a look at the timeline on this, and I'm not going to get too specific, but you can see mid to late morning across northeastern Florida up to Gainesville, midday around Ocala, early afternoon around the I-4 corridor. Lots of lightning expected, maybe some damaging winds here, but this threat will fade by the time we get late into the afternoon, into the evening as it moves farther south and east. And you can look at the photographs with me here, and you can see the amount of storm cape is not super high here, but it does climb a little bit around lunchtime. So we'll have to keep an eye on that before things clear out of here for the afternoon. Lots of rain with this storm system. We're looking at potentially 4 to 5 inches through the end of the week in parts of PA and New York. Just a really nasty week. Our next storm moves into the west. We'll talk about that one later. Here's a look at the NAM showing us how much rain will fall over the next few days. And we just don't need 2 to 3 more inches of rain, but unfortunately that's what we're looking at for a lot of this area. We're also looking at the threat for very heavy rain moving through portions of the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, 3 to 6 inches potentially here. And here is the Eclipse totality and center line. We won't see rain there, but we definitely have a lot of rain coming. Here's a look at the NAM that just kind of gives you guys an eye on what's expected here. Generally speaking, 2 to 4 inches. I would not be shocked if we saw a flood watch over eastern PA. It's been very wet this winter, and we've got more coming this spring. Here's a look at our snow chances here, and over the next 24 hours, potentially a foot of snow over eastern Wisconsin, including the Apple Valley, the Fox Valley here through Green Bay and up into the UP of Michigan. Maybe even an inch or two around Chicago here overnight into early tomorrow. So the Cubs game may not look too good here tomorrow, but even some small amounts all the way down into northern Kentucky and West Virginia. So we go from tornadoes this afternoon to snow showers tomorrow morning and afternoon. And that is unusual, but not unheard of this time of the year. Finally, let's look at the Northeast in New England. And you can see the NAM is putting over 2 feet of snow over the higher elevations and generally 1 to 2 feet in the middle and lower elevations here in central parts of Maine. As well as portions of New Hampshire. We're going to get dumped on with snow, but next week we may have great weather for the eclipse. Just kind of goes to show how volatile things are. Finally, we'll look at Atlantic Canada and southeastern Canada, and we are going to see significant snow over the interior part of New Brunswick, 20 to 30, maybe even 40 centimeters of snow. Parts of Quebec will see quite a bit more, and mainly northern and eastern Nova Scotia and PEI are going to see 10 to 20 centimeters of snow. Let's look at the eclipse. I wanted to do a whole video on this, but we got to deal with the severe weather first. You can see right now from Tomer Berg's website, the chances of seeing a lot of sunlight are not very high in Texas or in Oklahoma or Arkansas. They're a little bit better in the Ohio Valley, but the best chances here in the areas in blue are going to be across Vermont, Maine, southeastern Quebec, and over into New Brunswick. It's not to say we may not have an opening here, but if you're going to gamble on it, I don't think you're going to win, unfortunately. Just a very low chance that we see a great chance of seeing lots of sunlight across the area. And the areas I think are going to be the worst are going to be North Texas, maybe all the way to Round Rock and Austin. Then it gets a little bit better, but we may have to get lucky across northeastern Arkansas, up into central Indiana and northern Ohio. I think our best chances are going to be across the northern tier of the U.S. and southeastern Canada. But again, it's 6 days away and things can still change. I appreciate y'all's time today. Long video, lots to talk about. Feel like the dam just burst today for me. But I appreciate you guys. I really pray that you all stay safe today. If you're in this risk area, please take it seriously. I am going to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ in prayer today that people are going to be protected because as much as I want to alert people, there are things we just can't control, but I do believe in the power of prayer. I'm a Christian and I truly stand on the promises that God has given us. And that is, Paul has told us in Galatians 6:9, and let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. It's been a lot of weariness in my family. A lot's going on, but we're doing the Lord's work here. We are doing what God has called us to do, and the more you take on, the more you're going to be responsible for, the more burdens you can bear. But nothing compares to the burden that Jesus Christ bared. He died for us. He was resurrected. We just celebrated that. And I just want you to have a chance to understand that that means the world to me. And I pray that it does to you as well, because my life has changed in the 11 years I've been a Christian. I have changed what I put my effort and time into, and more importantly, the hope that I have for my future to live eternally with Jesus Christ in heaven. I had no hope before I became a Christian. I put all my faith in people around me, how much money I made, if I had a job or not, and that was just truly exhausting and truly just it's really difficult. Really put me in some difficult spots. Not that today's not difficult. I think we're all dealing with difficult times, but know this, having hope that there is a treasure in heaven waiting for us is the reason I continue to do what I do every day, and to do the Lord's work and to share my faith with you all, even though my true gift is forecasting. So hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll catch up soon. God bless you.